So when we started to do and work with the video and impulse, this was late 2012, beginning 2013. At the beginning, I thought, well, this is going to be really easy. You know, we are used to do video. We used to do ad impulse tests. So just picking up the system, plug it, and start doing it, and getting the results. And the question is, just after a few months, I got to notice, well, this is not going to be so easy, because I started getting all these traces that I couldn't understand, starting to have difficulties on a couple of patients where I was getting no traces and not what I was expecting, according to the clinics. So I came soon to realize, well, I've got to go back and see what I'm doing and try to really standardize all the methods. And so there is a learning curve, and you've got to learn it. And you've got to go back and try to see what are you doing, what are the traces, are they according to what is expected, what is being published, and then it came to verticals. Okay, but technically, okay. You see, Dutch always won. Always win. Thank you. Okay, and so then came the verticals. And so it all went all back again, because the verticals are a bit trickier. And so you had to also, once again, understand what we're doing. And the interesting thing is, at some point I thought, well, now we are having the best results we can. We are confident with the results. So we have 3 audiologists on the department, and they started to pick up the exam. And the interesting thing is, I started to see the same kind of errors of traces from the same people. So one of the audiologists only could do good LARPs, the only could do good RALPs, for instance. So that took us back and told us we have to standardize the method to compare results between us all. That But that's okay, I'll put it in my inside pocket, okay. So, as with this headset, video ad impulse, or as not as that video ad impulse, it's really a hands-on operator procedure. It will depend on you. It's not something that you ask the radiologist and you can blame it on it. It's something that you'll do. It's something that, and it depends on you, because you're the one who's picking up the patient, who putting on the mask, or giving the air thrust. You're the one who are seeing in what kind of conditions that mask is. You're the one who, when you have your hands on the patient, you're sensing if that patient is anticipating the movement. You're sensing if he is having a stiffer neck too stiff. You're sensing how the movements are going. And so there is a learning curve. And we're talking about a technique that has some characteristics that are subject to error. Why? Will always be some goggle slippage. You know, the skin, it's not completely attached to bone, so there is some friction. There is an algorithm that tracks the pupil that might be tricked by blinks, by something that gets into the pupil. So there is a tracking question. There is a sample rate. You'll only get 250 frames per second. Even Dr. Almagid told us yesterday, the future will probably be 2 cameras, 500 hertz, and a bilateral video ad impulse test. So that's the future, and that will give you some problems at this point. And so there's a lot of issues that have been related, that have been pointed out to be able to give you some problems with the video ad impulse. Room lighting, the distance to the target, mental status of the patient, the awareness of the patient when doing the exam, detection, calibration, how are the goggles, are you touching the goggles, are the goggles moving while you're doing the exam, is the patient anticipating, is the patient too stiff, is he blinking a lot, does he have makeup, does she have makeup, or he. What's the overshoot? How are you doing your verticals? Are you in? Is your gaze in plane? Are you in plane? So there are a lot of issues that can throw you some tricks on your exam. And so the way we decided to make this presentation, well, first is how to do it. Let's go to these technical aspects. How's the best way to set up the exam? Then go and let's have a trace evaluation. What should we expect? What should we look for in that trace? And try to see some artifacts and try to recognize them. And so that's basically what we're going to do in the next half an hour or so. So first of all, room lighting. Do we need a dark room? No, everyone knows that we don't. We can do it in a normal lighting room. It can even help you to do that. Why? If there's a small nystagmus, it will suppress it. It will help you suppress it. It will help you to decrease that pupil. So have a normal light room. Just avoid sunlight exposure. Why? Because of the reflection on the mirror. Any kind of rooms or lightness that you may have on the background that will reflect on that mirror, that will be picked up by the tracking system. Everything that's white and reflection, so that's the only thing that you have to pay attention according to the light room. That's actually one of the benefits. You know, it's a portable system. You can take it anywhere. Just set up the same conditions and can do the exam there. And lighting can actually be a friend. Regular chair, just with some armrests. And the regular chair don't need any rotatory, any fancy chair. Actually, the benefit of having a regular chair is that if you want to do verticals and with a whole body turn, you can just ask the patient to lift up, turn the chair, and then have symptom down again and go and do the verticals if you want to do it that way. What we did, and since we had three different persons working with the system, we put these lines in the floor just to be sure, and we measure it, the center of the chair, to the beginning of the chair, to the wall, and the person is seated at 1 meter 40 centimeters. We just put that marks in the floor just because we had 3 different people working there, and we wanted to have the same exact conditions. So if the patient gets up, the chair is moved, you turn it to the left, you turn it to the right, so everyone knows where's the center, everyone knows where the patient is going to sit. It's nothing too fancy, just to have the same conditions for each single examiner. And we have the chair at a meter distance, over 1 meter. Why? You want to avoid the parallax effect. When you're turning the head, the perspective to the target will differ from right to left. And second, if it's too close with the convergence, you'll have higher gains. So plus than 1 meter, if you wanted to have at 2 or 3, very well. The problem will be if the patient can really see the target. And the other question is multiple targets. And we have disposed them in that way, just that the patient, to adjust to different heights of patients. And secondly, sometimes the patient might look up or down just to get rid of the LEDs of the camera, and so you can adjust according to the patient. And it's better than if you only have one target, then you don't know where he's going to look. So we've put different targets so the patient has somewhere to look, and we can adjust accordingly. So mask position. Now it's when it all begins, and right now the best patient is a bald one, because that's where you can really put your mask and don't have a problem. Right now what we're seeing, it's a lot of ladies with all this air-sprayed hair, all of these hairdos, and you have to break it down. Why? Because if not, the mask won't be tightened enough, and it will slip. So the first thing is fasten securely in position. What we normally do, we basically put the mask and fasten in 2 times. We put the mask, we give it a little tight, and then I go and check, sometimes even facing the face of the patient, if how the mask is. I lift the mask, pull the upper eyelid, then pull the lower eyelid, and that's when I adjust the mask and tighten really securely in the second time. In that way, even the mask will hold the eyelid a bit upper, exactly. And we're going to see that picture a bit later on. The other thing is well center of the nasal bridge. One of the good ways to do it is when you're standing behind the patient, you just have to lean over and see if there's any gap between the nasal bridge and the mask, between the eyebrows. If there is, the goggle they are going to slip away. So if there are, just tighten it up again and again. See if they are really checked, if they are really secure. Hold the eyelid, hold the cable. You don't want that cable to be loosened up, and when you're doing the air thrusts to be moving or you're touching the cable. So secure the cable, and then we're going to detect the eye and with that region of interest. So, okay. When you're going to coils and calorics, you're going to nystagmus and slow phase velocities. What we are doing is studying the catch-up saccade. So we are tracking the pupil. That's what we're doing. We're tracking a pupil with a head in a 3D space, but what the algorithm is doing is tracking the pupil. So first of all, and we have two views. That gray view and that camera view, and we normally switch between one and the other to see if the eye is in the best position, and if you don't have any eyelids over the pupil. So the first thing is we see if the pupil, we go to the region of interest, we check the pupil, and then we go to the gray area. Why? To see the threshold. We don't want to have too much threshold. We don't have to have lower threshold. If the threshold is too low, the pupil will not be well defined. If the threshold is too high, as in the lower image over here, that light over there, that can even be makeup, that can be whatever, that will be picked up by the algorithm. So you'll be flicking between the pupil and that. That will interfere with the tracking system. So you need to have a good threshold, and then we move again to the camera view. Why? Because we want to see if that region of interest is well centered, and those LEDs, reflection of pupil. One of the things that will give you artifacts is if those LEDs will impact and will give a shadow, a bump in the pupil. We'll show you that later on, but those LEDs have to be out of there. Check the threshold, remove makeups, remove eyeliners. If you can see over here, this is basically a small band. This is a patient with a very narrow eye closure. So what we do, we grab a little bit of tape, go to the upper eyelid, pull it up, and stick it. It's just for the exam. It's 10 minutes. You just take it out afterwards. But it's a good way to hold drooping eyelids. You know, tape the upper eyelid, pull it up, and then the mask goes over. Remove all the makeups and eyeliners. This can be a problem these days. We're going to show you that also, especially tattoos, eyeliners. We're seeing patients with tattoo makeups that you just can't take it off. So what can we do? Okay, and then calibration. This is a functional measure. You know? Eye position versus head position over the impulse. So you don't want to overshoot or undershoot. If you do that, you're going to have high gains or very low gains just because of bad calibration. So the way to do it is after doing that calibration, check if it's right. Can I have this first video, please? So the way to do it is very easily. You're just going to do a synovial movement and see if that eye and head really overlay. You just do this. Ask him at the target, and see if the patient doesn't, if the patient holds his gaze. And then you check this calibration. You're actually doing a second exam. You actually are checking for cerebellar problems if the patient can hold his eye. And you confirm that your calibration is good and that can move on. And a second advantage of doing this is that you actually are loosening that neck a little bit. And you're already seeing if the patient isn't understanding or not the exam. Or if he wants to anticipate or if he has his neck too stiff. So you actually are preparing to do the exam and checking your conditions, giving him a second exam, and be sure that what you've done so far is good and that the patient is understanding the exam. And you calibrate it, so if everything is good, we shall move on. Okay, so one of the things is you want to have this good calibration and not that overshoot that it's like it's on that slide over there. That will give you high gains. And then you're just looking, why do I have a gain of 1.2, 1.3? Just a calibration mistake, okay? This is not a calibration mistake. this is just a stiff neck. This is the patient that it wasn't allowing us just to move one to the right or to the left. The other one is just the patient that was looking off target. So you understand, you are getting a picture of what's going on right at that moment. Very well. So horizontal head thrust, how to do it? Well, first of all, we like to be behind the patient, always viewing the computer screen. Why? Because you have a real-time window, you have a display window of the velocities, so you want to see if there's an icy trace or not, and you want to adjust your thrust according to the last one. And the way to do it is just go and look at the screen, look what's going on. We want to go first, a really head turn and stop, avoid bounce. It's very easily just to hold the patient's head and go this and that, go off center and then coming back. It's very easy, almost like a natural movement. You know, it's a sinusoidal movement. You go off center and then you bring him back. No, go off center and stop. Why? You want to avoid bounce. You want to avoid, if you're turning right, you want to avoid going back to the left, because if you're going back to the left, basically you are stimulating the left side and the eyes are going on the wrong position, meaning on the direction of the right side, on the direction of the head movement. So avoid the bounce. Can we show, there are two videos over here, can we play them? So when we ask the patient to check the traces, and then we actually going always to see the two windows. And if you see the low window, whenever you're doing impulse, you know, I went to 200, then 200 on the left, on the left side, on the right, and so I'm adjusting my head thrust according to the last one. Why? I'm doing different velocities. That's a way to do some randoms. Not only to going to the left or right at a random pace, but when you're going at different velocities, you know, it's different if you go twice to the right at different velocities. The patient never knows what is going to happen next. So it's a way to offer some random saccades and in going at different velocities. The number of impulses, really that depends on the quality. You know, if you have an exam, you just want to check that horizontal canal, if you're going to have good impulses at 150, 200 milliseconds, you know, with 5 impulses, you have already a good idea of what's going on. But naturally, if you do 20 or 30 impulses, you can have 150, 200, 250 degrees per second. So, and you have a better idea, especially if you want to follow up the outcome. You know, in vestibular neuritis, lower frequencies will recover faster. So that's a good way to follow up. So the number of impulses really depends on the quality, but have a good trace on different frequencies, at very least 150 degrees per second. And when you're doing this, always see if there's some stiffness of the neck. Always see if the patient is trying to go ahead of you. And the way to avoid that is exactly try to give him some random movements on the head impulses, not letting him know where you're going to next. So, okay, we're going to try to review a couple of things that normally I'm asked to. And so, what about the hands position? Should they be on top? They should be on top of the head. Can I have them on the chin? Should I be behind the patient? Should I be facing the patient? Because there are some papers published on that. As we do it, is hands on top, and when you put the hands on top, avoid contact with goggles and strap. You want to avoid pulling a bit that strap and moving the goggles. But there are some papers on that. Interestingly, one of them, they compare the chin holding versus the head holding position, okay? And they actually found some differences, especially with velocities when holding the chin. But the mean value for the video head impulse gain was actually higher for the head holding position. So there were not great differences. But there is another paper that we're going to talk about, that last one, where they actually performed this technique in different settings, either behind or facing the patient, and they actually also didn't find that many differences. For me, it doesn't make much sense to hold the jaw, to hold the chin. You know, it's not stable enough. You're going to have some wobble when you're moving it. Doesn't make much sense. It's not really very natural. We hold the head. And even when we were doing the video and impulse test and you're facing the patient, you never hold the chin, you know, you go always for the head.
really tight, really fixed. What about the head position? Now, that's an interesting one. Because, you know, you have that 30-degree angle of the horizontal canal, so should we give a heads down? Well, interesting. There are papers from Dr. Courtois from 20 years ago in cats that already answer that question and tell you, no, you should not. Because the head thrust, the head acceleration will decrease according to the cosine of the angle of the canal. So there are papers on that. Independently, there is a paper that went and did heads up with a heads down position and tried to see if there was difference. It's a Korean paper that was published just this year. And they tried to see if there was any difference. Actually, they find no difference in the peak head velocity, but they found a significant decrease in the VOR gain in the affected side, according to the with the head down, not in the non-diseased side, independently if it was the left or the right side. So that made you wonder. But they only made this statement until 250 degrees per second. Why? One of the things, if your nasal bridge is too low, that tends, if the mask is not tight enough, that tends the mask tends to slip over time, especially at higher velocities, and that will increase the number of artifacts. So that's why one of the first things I said, see if that goggle is really tight and see if it's really over the nasal bridge, if there's any space behind the goggle and the nose. So they do have this statement, but the thing is they compare it to healthy subjects. We do not know what their normal values are. They did not establish their own normal population, and being specific for an Asian population, does that matter? Well, we go back to and actually there is also another practical issue. If you're going down, the pupil is going up. And that will be much easier, the eyelid to overlay and to have some blinking problems. So for us, it doesn't make too much sense. There's only one paper. We do it with the head straight. We don't do it with the head down. But there is this paper at the moment. What about the direction? This is something that everyone is asking. Even yesterday at the sessions. Do we do it outwards or do we do it inwards, from the midline out of center, or the other way around? This is something that a lot of people have looked into. Not only with normal subjects, with acute subjects, with the chronic subjects, and at the end of the day, actually some of these papers, at least one, even compare two different systems. The first one. And at the end of the day, it doesn't make much difference. But what it does is, if the patient is going from outwards to inwards, he knows where the movement is going. So that's not random. He knows what to do. You'll have some more anticipatory. There are some issues. For instance, there is a small increase in the latency of the response. That might be due to the proprioceptive pathway. It's longer, so it takes a little bit longer to take there. But most, and for me, the far most important is that the patient will know where it's going. So you're not offering any random to the head thrusts. And it will be difficult to do even some more different velocities. And another thing, if the patient knows where he's going, he's probably going to have a more stiff neck, you know, because it's stopped and doesn't know if he's going left or right. You're not, you didn't loosen up his neck. So we always do from midline to off center, okay, outwards. Okay, and then came the verticals. Well, this is different, and this is a little bit more trickier, because this is a 2D system. What it measures is horizontal and vertical, but torsional can get in the way. But it's so you must avoid torsional component. And one of the main issues with artifacts on the video impulse test is that if you're not expecting them, if you're not paying attention or do not know what to look for, you're going to have a perfectly good exam with perfectly good mistakes, and you're not going to be aware of them. And you're going to think, wow, why am I have a good exam. This patient has nothing. Oh, no, this is a new syndrome. So the question is, if you're not expecting them, you won't pay attention to them, and you don't realize that you have a bad exam. And this is very easy with the verticals. Why? Because when you're going to LARP, if you're not going really in the direction of the canal, and now this is posterior, this is anterior over here, you've got the eye gaze, and if you just do this, you're going to roll. You're going to have low vertical and lots of roll, and that will give you some gain. Low gain, but you'll think, well, I have a decreased force function on my superior canal, on my posterior canal, and what you're having is a stimulation of the wrong plane. So the way to do it with the 2D system was also established some years ago. It was basically putting the canal, the gaze, in the plane of the canals. So the way to do it is basically turn right for LARPs or left for ALPs, and an eccentric of far laterals gaze. And there's this paper from the Sydney group, from Lee McGarvey, exactly that shows that vertical VOR decreases with the gaze orientation. So if you're looking to the center line, or if you're going offline, the VOR will start to decrease. Why? Because you're not in the plane of the canal. So one of the ways to do it is exactly gaze and head in the plane of the canal, avoid the roll plane, and you still have to go for those velocities of under 250 degrees per second. And that's difficult. One of the things with the learning curve, either on the horizontals or on the verticals, is when you start, your first acceleration is going to be around 60 to 100 milliseconds. Then over time, you're going to get those 150s, and when you're good at it, you'll get 250, 300 easily. The question is, it's a training practice, nothing else. So, okay, there are basically two ways to do it. You just either turn the head, or you can turn head and body, and then just gaze the canal, gaze the gaze in the far lateral position, just fixating the target. So and when you're behind the patient, it's very easy to, just basically see that midline. You'll imagine that 45 degrees, 30 to 45. A bit lesser, and you just turn the patient's head or the body and head, and just face the point, the target. The fact is, verticals are a bit more prone to artifacts. You are in the far gaze lateral, so the eye closure is a bit narrow naturally. So you have some more eyelids over there, and if you're out of plane, and you can easily do that, you won't make a notice, and you'll create artifacts. So a couple of signs of poor gaze alignment are, and we're going to see them later on, are a delayed eye velocity trace, and that basically means you're going on a run plane. Basically, if you're going through when you're on LARP, if you don't make the acceleration, don't make the velocity right to that target, but through the nose, you're going to have a delayed eye velocity trace. Or if you have a decreased VOR gain with no corrective saccades. That's a couple of signs that will show you that, well, maybe something is wrong. Can we have that video, please? So one of the things of the system right now is that you can actually put the patient in position, and the system will give you an idea if he is at least 30 to 45 degrees. So that will help you. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure that the patient is looking the right way. That the system won't tell you. Okay? The system might tell you, it will give you some feedback if you're overshooting or if you're simulating the wrong plane, but it won't take out every single curve. So if you are stimulating roll, if you are on the wrong plane, the system won't take out those curves. So, and again, one of the things, when you're going back to verticals, not only check the threshold and switch between those camera views. I actually prefer to do verticals only with the camera view. Why? Because then that's what I know what I'm doing. If those eyelids are getting into place, and if those LEDs are getting into the pupil. And I'm going to show you that later on. Okay, so this was the setup. We already know what kind of movements we are going to do, what we are stimulating. We have calibrated everything. The exam already was made, so now we have a result. What should we look for? Trace evaluation. Well, first of all, the quality of the trace and the morphology of the curve. Is the eye velocity proportional to the head velocity? Do we have a good bell shape curve? Do we have a proportional eye velocity, or is it clip? Is it saturated? let's go down there to my baseline. Did my head movement went too low? Did I add an overshoot? Did I go too far? Okay. What's that relation? Do I have catch-up saccades? And the way we do it when we try to classify it this way is, do I have catch-up saccades? So are they present or absent? Are they ovid or covered? Do I have it all grouped like in the first slide? No, we have those grouped covered saccades around 100 milliseconds, 120 milliseconds, and those ovid at 250 to 80 milliseconds? Or are they all scattered around, as we have over here in this lower slide? Are they reproducible? Is the direction in the right plane? Are the velocities meaningful? We have just this small saccades with just those with a small velocity. That's not meaningful. Don't pay attention to that. That's not a saccade that deserves to pay attention. And last, and only last, we're going to look at VOR gain. So the last thing you want to look, and it's not the first, is the last, is the VOR gain. Why? Because if you have a low gain in a bad exam, that's what you'll pay attention, right? If you have a low VOR, you're going to say, well, I have a deficit over here. Doesn't matter what the rest of the exam. It does, because if you don't, your trace is bad, if it's full of artifacts, you have to repeat that exam, and if you're just looking at the VOR, at the VOR gain, you're not paying attention to the trace. So last thing, first thing, trace, morphology, last thing, VOR gain and asymmetry. And the asymmetry is interesting. It's interesting because especially for low VORs, and to see if there's a really variation and a meaningful asymmetry or not. Always check those 3D curves. Okay, Dr. Almaghi also explained us that yesterday. Always check. It's good to see if the latency of those saccades, are they really covered? Are they happening at the same time as the head movement? Do we have that tunnel over there that tells us, the decrease of the VOR gain? So always check the curves. It will be helpful in showing not only those covered, but also the ovid, what is happening. So, and now let's try and see if we can recognize some of the artifacts. Interesting. There is a paper on this, published last year, quantifying the vestibular ocular reflex with oculography. What they did, and this is basically the Newman-Toker group, so they have lots of experience with video and impulse. They have published several papers with that, and so they have 26 patients, acute vestibular syndromes, 16 vestibular neuritis, and 10 strokes. So they were all observed in different settings, emergency settings, but different settings. So in different light conditions, in different rooms. Some of those patients were observed with they had their video and impulse performed behind the patient. Some of them were in facing the patient, and they were asked the patient to hold a fixation on some object behind the examiner. One of the interesting things is, with 1358 traces, they described that at least 44% had one artifact. So, and we are talking about training examiners that have done several video and impulse tests, and they report when reviewing their own traces that at least one artifact was in 44. That's almost off. The other thing is that they report 22% of visually uninterpretable, although accepted by the software, although accepted by the system, artifacts. This is a 9%. We can argue this was in different settings, even if holding the chain didn't make a difference, but they actually found a lot of percentage of artifacts. So what is going on? A lot of bounce, some trace oscillations, some multiple peaks. They compare actually the holding jaw versus the holding top technique with some more artifacts at holding the chain. Okay. But interestingly, also more frequent in patients with abnormal VOR. So one of the things they did, they coded their artifacts. And so let's go a bit through. They coded in 8 types. One basically that delayed phase shift, that delayed eye velocity. So they attribute to a loose strap, That really high gain, it was attributed to a wrong calibration. Okay, we saw that. If you are too close to the target, or if you have a wrong calibration, like an overshoot, that will give you high gains. Some pseudosaccades that are isolated just to, they coded in different ways. Mini blinks and blinks, if they are of small velocity and scarce, or if you have several and high velocity in pseudosaccades attributed to blinks. A small two-peak incision that they attribute either to touching goggles or also to some mini blinkings. That's an interesting one. The head overshoot, like I show you, if the head is going too low, that baseline, that means you are going, you bring the head not only off center, but then also to the mid-center in the same movement. And that's an important question. Why? Well, first of all, it is expected if you have not, if you think at a push-pull system, it's not only a simulation of one canal and the inhibition of the other, it's also the disinhibition and the facilitation by the good canal of the bad canal. That will increase you the good velocity. So if you don't have a good simulation, or if you have a net bounce, you're going to simulate the other side. Okay? There's actually been some talk about anti-compensatory saccades. There are 2 papers on that, on the good side, that are probably just head overshoot. You know? Just think, if you're going to the right and you're coming back to the left, you're going to have some eyes movement on the to the right again. So, head overshoot, eyes going the wrong direction, meaning eyes going on the direction of the head movement. Okay, so if I'm turning right, the eyes should go left. This is eyes going right too. That they attribute to patient inattention and some pupil tracking loss. So this is from last year, and one of the things that we decided was, well, let's review a few of our traces, and let's see what I can find. And we basically did the same coding, so the phase shift, the eye gain, what's in black, it's from my own, and it's not from the authors. And so the pseudosaccades, trach oscillations, the 2 peaks, that we coded in a couple of different ways. So we coded that 2 peaks and minor 2 peaks very slowly, and these major 2 peaks with pseudosaccades. I'm going to show you this. They didn't add coded insufficient impulse velocity. You'll get that. That's also an artifact measure. And they just put eyes on the wrong way, and we said, well, maybe eyes on the wrong way with really 2 peaks and a pseudo-low gain. We found 2 patients with this. We really didn't know what it was, so I'm going to show you. Because this is a learning curve, and we're still learning when we're seeing different traces that we're not expecting. And we're seeing this on occasion. So the insufficient velocity, that's a deficient technique. That's operator dependent. Okay? The eyes going the wrong way, maybe either blink or some loose goggles. We can argue about inattention if the patient is not really understanding, and when he's trying to fixate at some point, he loses objective what he's doing, and the eyes go on the direction of the head movement. And the 2 peaks, the major 2 peaks, it's a lead artifact that we're going to see. Okay, first things first. You want to do your head impulses. A good way to train is do your own normal population. That's a good way to start. Why? You'll have already published papers. You can compare your results to them. So it's a good way to validate your own results if you do your own populations. That's what we did, and we started in 2015. We actually, at the time, we stopped at between the age of 60 and 70. We are now finishing until the 90s. We already have some patients with 80s, and we want to go at least to the 90s group. And basically, one of the things, this is by age group and canal, and this was what has been reported by the Sydney group. Slight difference, as to be expected. This is the mean gain with 2 standard deviations. But this was basically the same values that have been reported. So that, at very least, not only gave us confidence to what we were doing, but allowed us to compare our own results on many years patients and some other patients with our own control population. So I think that's the way to start. Then, phase shift. Phase shift, just because of loose strap, that's not something that we generally see. But we do see is a small an eye gain. You're going to see on that horizontal one an eye gain of 1.2 just because of loose strap. This is actually a patient that we know, this is a recent patient, we knew that the mask wasn't tight enough. Why? Because we couldn't tighten it anymore. This is a very narrow patient from India, very narrow face, and we just couldn't tighten it anymore. So we knew that it wasn't tight enough, and we got those gains. At the time, we were expecting something. We got those eye gains just because of a loose strap. Okay, eye gains wrong because of the calibration or those loose goggles. And you see over there, also you're going to that right to 1.27 if you have just an overshoot. And it's very easy. If you not look at the target, but you look through the target, you're going to have a wrong calibration, an overshoot, and an eye gain. So that's why check your calibration, because sometimes the patient is not really understanding or not doing what you're expecting him to do. Oh, those pseudosaccades with the mini blinks. Okay, that's it. Those are just a couple of saccades out of that. You see, they're not even 100 degrees per second. Probably 80, some of them 50. They're not something to value. Just a couple of blinks that got into the trace. No big deal. You can move on. Just don't pay much attention to it. You can read them. You can take them out and improve your traces, but not something to pay attention. What we call now those pseudosaccades blink, we call it with pseudo-covenant overt. Why? Because of this. This is patients with makeups, okay? And we are seeing some patients that are coming in with tattoo eyeliner, tattoo makeup, and you can't take them out. Because at the beginning of the exam, you break down that hair due, you ask the person to clean up their makeup, but if this tattoo, you cannot remove it. And so what we'll show is basically you'll have a night threshold, or the blinks will always be, or the eyelids will be over the pupil, and basically you'll have this sometimes noisy trace at the beginning, or just this small covered and overt that were blinks because of the makeup. A good way, and I've only learned about this at this meeting, was try to cover it with a white makeup eyeliner. Okay? Someone gave me this tip. Maybe work. Mariana. So this might be a problem. Again, some pupil tracking loss. That's you're going to see, but that you'll pick up on that real-time display. Why? You'll see a very noisy baseline. And if you have a very noisy baseline, generally you have a night threshold. There's a lot of light going in, some blinks. So that's something and you'll really check. You can check that on the real-time window. Okay, those mini blinks with those. What we decided to differentiate between two peaks, we call it minor, and then I'll show you major, and I'll show you why. Because a couple of things that we've seen is just, and this is what we've seen not only because of not because of touching goggles, but because of mini blinks and makeups also. It's that small two peaks over there, not really meaningful, but also the same artifact that we saw earlier with that almost small saccades around the trace. That's just because of makeup problems. We don't think it's touching the goggles. We've seen this in patients with these problems with the eyeliners and with the tattoo makeups, and we were sure that we were not touching the goggles when we still got that. So we think it's also the same problem that with the makeup. A different question is these major two peaks. Okay, let's focus first on this trace, and then I'll show you those on the left side. On the right side, what these are two different patients. okay? And if you're going to see, you've got up and down, and it goes away, up and down, and you have these two peaks. And if you look at the camera, you'll have that lead onto the pupil. What does make it it's a deviation of the center of mass. So basically, you're still seeing the cross in the center of the pupil, but that is being deviated. And remember, when you're doing the movement, that lead will move also. So it will move from one part of the pupil to the other, and that will deviate the center of mass, and the algorithm will track as a deviation of the pupil. And so it will give you pump from the lead going to one and to the other place, to the other side. And that will give you a two peak. Okay? So one of the things, that's why I like, especially with verticals, to check on the camera view to see if we have the LEDs onto the pupil or not, because that will give you a lot of artifacts. On the left side, and that's why we call this not only a LED but also a blink, because on the left side, that was a very recent patient that we saw. It was a 70-year-old lady. She had a BPPV at the end of the day, but when I did the head impulse test, I got some doubts. So I ordered video head impulse, and she had a very narrow eye closure with some eyelids going on top. And what we got with the first video head impulse was that two peaks, that pseudo cover, so the problem of blinking, and the eyelids going on top. Because the eyelids, if they go on top of the pupil too, that will deviate the center of mass. So the tracking system will pick that up. So what we did was, she had a drooping eyelid, we pulled it up, we tape it, we put the mask all over again, and we did the exam. And you see how the gains go up and how the traces really get better? So let me move this way. We almost got rid of that two peak, the small saccade, some noisy trace lines still, but it got really better. The only thing that we did was pull the eyelid up. So not only the LEDs, but on our conclusion, also the eyelids can give this artifact. And now the head overshoot. This is not something that, and when I read about the anti-compensatory, is not something that we've seen, but if you can look over here, the head, this is the baseline, and the head goes all this way down, even on the right side. So when the head goes down, you're getting that movement on the wrong way too, on the wrong way, and you're giving that patient an impulse to the eyes move on the direction of the head impulse. Okay. So that's operator induced. We don't see that much, but what we have recently seen is this. That's why we decided to differentiate between two peaks, minor and major. Because when we saw this, we saw, no, this is the eyes going on the wrong position. And if you go, you have this big peak where it's over there and then goes all the way down on one side and on the other side. Okay, there are two main differences on this trace. One is this one over here. Are you seeing the eyes with this big saccade? This is the eyes going first and then the head. This is something wrong, okay? This might be a loose goggle, couldn't be tight enough. If the eyes is going first and the head, something is going wrong. And another thing, remember, the way the algorithms calculates the gain is area under the desaccated curve. So all these saccades are going out of the algorithm, and so that will give you a naturally low gain. So is this gain real? Probably is due to that desaccation of the algorithm. Okay, those curves are going out. The second one doesn't have that on the left. So we just have that major down peak. We think that's a blink. Maybe that can be also an inattention from the patient. You know, the patient, when it goes right, it stops fixating, and then it drifts the eyes on the direction of the head. That can give you, maybe that can give you that. Actually, we are not. If in this patient we could see that, and so we said, well, this is some goggles that are loose. On the left one, we attribute this more to blinking than to inattention or to loose goggle, but maybe inattention plays a role too. So this is an artifact, and a good one. Okay, insufficient head thrust. Okay. Doesn't seem anything too wrong with these traces, except that velocity is not too high, and that's what is really going on. When you add 100 and 120 degrees per second peak velocity, that's not strong enough to elicit a VOR, decreased gain. And so we just have to increase just a little bit, just under the 240s, and the grains start to decrease. So at very least in the horizontals, be over 150s. Same patient. She had an head impulse that was positive, and then when the exam got back, it was a normal. Just when you look, if you look just at the gain, it was a normal gain, a bell-shaped curve, but all those covered saccades didn't make any sense. If you go back, all the impulses were around 100 milliseconds, so 100 degrees per second, too low. As soon as they just increase to 150, and you saw that gain going down, and you saw those covered and those overt really grouped, and that was the head impulse that was positive. So if you're going just to look at the gain and you don't look at your traces and you don't look at your velocities, you'll have a bad outcome you don't even notice. LARPs and RALPs. Now, this is where it's a bit easier to get some artifacts, but they actually are always the same kind of artifacts. And I told you earlier, signs of poor gaze alignment are delayed high velocity traced. And if you have a decreased VOR gain with no corrective saccades, that's a sign that you're going into the roll. Okay? And one of the ways to check that delayed high velocity is this phase shift. You see how the eyes are lagging the head? That's basically you're throwing the head through the nose and not in the plane of the canal. So if the patient has this is in the LARP position, and if you're going like this, even if he's looking at, but if you're going through the nose, you're going to get a delayed high velocity. So go, and the movement is towards the target in the plane of the canals in the eye. Remember the LEDs? Can we show that last video, please? Okay, check the LEDs. You see how he's going up? And while you're doing the vertical, it goes up. So if you have to take those LEDs out of the pupil, because if not, that center of mass will be deviated, and what you got at the end is two peaks. If it's on the pupil, you've got to take it out. When you're doing LARPs and you're going forward, the pupil is going up. So what it will do is, if it will pick up that LED, it will pick into two movements, when going up and then going down, and you have a two peak on the trace. So that's one of the things I like to do the exam with the camera view, because you won't pick that up in the threshold view, and you're not be aware that those LEDs are getting into the algorithm. Okay. On the posterior canal is a bit different, because you're going backwards, and so that will head up the movement of the pupil with the movement of the eye, and so what you'll have, it's more of a covered that is leaving the trace. So it's a bit different, but that's also an artifact from the LED. So just to finish, what we found more, it's actually blinking problems. Some loss of pupil tracking because of narrow eye closures, drooping eyelids, some makeups, some problems with the thresholds. Sometimes you're going to have some goggle slippage if you can't tighten that mask strong enough for how much you try. You know, there's a limitation to how much you can tighten it up, and especially for the vertical planes, be aware, be attentive to the gaze direction and to the plane of the canal and to the direction of the air thrust. That's what you, and that's very easy to pick up on traces. If you have that delayed high velocity, if you have that low gain and no saccade, you're on the wrong plane. And just check your velocities always. And adjust your air thrust accordingly to your last velocity. So if you're going 250, then go to 200, and then to 250, go back again, so to have different velocities at different timings. And I will leave you with a photo of Lisbon, and invite you all to be there. Well, thank you very much.